In this video, we will look at how can we create the frequency distribution, percent frequency distribution, and the histogram for the quantitative variables. And so in order to do this practice, you need to have the dataset, Excel file, dataset for quantitative variable available. So let's open the Excel file, dataset for quantitative variable. And on this file, you will see we have two columns of data. So the first column is ACT score, and the second column is GPA. So in this practice, we're only using my second column, GPA. So we're only using the GPA. So in this case, in the class, we mentioned for the quantitative data, in order to create the frequency distribution, the first step you have to do is to define the classes. So here, I already help you to define the classes. So the first class is GPA smaller and equal to 1. And the second class is GPA larger than 1 and smaller and equal to 2. And the third class is GPA larger than 2, smaller and equal to 3. And the last class is GPA larger than 3, smaller and equal to 4. So one of the characteristics you should realize in terms of how I define the classes is there is no overlapping. So you can imagine if a student got a GPA equal to 2, and he will belong to second class instead of third, because for the third class, the 2 is not included. So this is how I define the classes. So after we define the classes, and we need to define the bin range in order to use the Excel. So bin range. So what is bin range? So bin range is the upper limit of each class. So the bin range is the upper limit of each class. So look at these 4 classes. So now you should realize why for all 4 classes, I all have the upper limit included, because they are my bin range. So the bin range is the upper limit of each class. So now the first class, the upper limit is 1. And the second class, the upper limit is 2. And the third class, 3. And the fourth class, the upper limit is 4. So this is my bin range. So after you define the bin range, so now we're going to go to data. So click the data tab and find the data analysis. So if you don't have a data analysis, please follow my another video, how to add the data analysis to your Excel file video to add the data analysis to your Excel. So by default, there is no data analysis on your Excel. You have to manually add the data analysis to your Excel. So now click data analysis and then choose histogram. So this is what we're going to use, called histogram. And then we click OK. So we have 2 sections, input range and output options. So for the input, and they require 2 informations, the input range and the bin range. So the input range equal to the data set. So where is the data set? So in my case, it's on the B column. So first, I click this little icon and then select from B1 to B121. And then I click this little icon again and then go back. So the second is trying to select the bin range. So we just created. Click this little icon and select from the first cell to the last one. So make sure include the bin range, the label bin range. So now look at the data we selected, the input range and bin range. For both columns, the first cell. So the first cell, they are all considered as labels, right? The GPA and the bin range. So then you have to select this box, labels, because they are not my observations. They are just labels. And after you did that, and make sure don't forget about the last box, chart output. By checking this box, you will have the histogram generated by the computer. So that's everything we created. And so let's place our outcome in the new worksheet called the frequency. And then we can click OK. So now computer generated a new page for us. So we have two columns, bin range and the frequency distribution. So the bin range is we just defined the upper limit for each class, and the frequency is how many are belonging to each class. And on the right hand side here, we see this chart. So the reason we can see it because we select the chart output. So this is not exactly what we are looking for. This is not a histogram yet because there is gap between two bars. So remember, the histogram is different from bar chart. So for histogram, the bars should be next to each other. So how can you close the gap? So choose one of the blue bar. After you choose it, left double click the mouse. Remember, it's left double clicked. So after you left double click the mouse, and you will see this dialog called the format data point. And then make sure to choose the series options. And under the series options, there is two options called the series overlap. Don't worry about this one, but look at the second one, the gap width. The gap width. So actually, the gap width is the size of the gap between two bars. So by default here is 150%. So that's why we can see this white, the two bar are separate to each other so far away. So what we're gonna do is changing the 150% to 0. So you can type in 0, and after you type in 0, push enter on the keyboard. So now you can see the change on the histogram. So there is no gap anymore. So this is the correct histogram. And so second, in terms of the presentation of your frequency distribution here, so after you copy and paste on your Word document, and make sure changing the class names, because obviously for me, I understand, okay, this is a bin range, which is upper limit for each class. But for people who doesn't know anything about Excel, when you present your result, you need to make sure your audience can understand it. So what you're going to do is replace the bin range by their class names. So the classes name we already defined. So we're going to replace it. We don't need the last class. So this is my frequency distribution. And so in terms of the how to calculate the relative frequency distribution and the percent, and we already talked about it in the categorical data. So for the relative frequency distribution, you have to use the frequency divided by the sample size. So how can you get the sample size? So sample size is equal to all the frequency add together. So let's name it as total. And we introduced before, we are using the function called sum, S-U-M, and parentheses, and select all the frequencies for each classes, and close the parentheses, and 120 is my sample size. So now we can start to work on the relative frequency. So for the first cell of the relative frequency equal to the first class frequency divided by your total sample size. And as I said, we can use the drop down function, and which means we're going to lock my determinant as we drop down. We only want the numerator keep updating. So then go to the function box and put a mouse between C and 17. Find F4 on your keyboard, F4, and push F4, and you should put two dollar signs. One is in front of C, one is in front of 17. By doing this, you lock your denominator. And so if you cannot using F4 function on your keyboard, you maybe have the laptop. So make sure you find the dollar sign on your keyboard. So manually add in dollar signs. One is before C and one is before 17. After you did it, and push enter on your keyboard. So now we can using the drop down function. So move the mouse to the right down corner and left click the mouse and hold it and drag it down. So this is the relative frequency. And for the percent frequency, so actually it is equal to the relative frequency multiplied by 100. So let's type in equal to relative frequency multiplied by 100 and push enter. So this is the percent frequency for first class. Then we can use the drop down function. Since 100 is a constant as you drag down, and there is no update on the constant. So we can just drag it down. So move the mouse to the right down corner and drag it down. So this is your percent frequency distribution. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. So this is the one method we are teaching how we can create a frequency distribution for quantitative variables.